Hi Equals, it's Kim, and I'm here with an update on the Pastor Protection Act that was introduced into the Ohio General Assembly, actually probably introduced a year or so ago, but it recently, in this last fall, had a sudden passage in the House where it had previously pretty much been dead, and then it got a lot of attention in the Senate in the last couple weeks. It looks like it's not going anywhere, so let's talk about what that means. Just very, very briefly. It means that advocates like yourself, a lot of you who watch these videos are friends of mine, and I'm sure you saw the requests to contact your legislator, etc., and it seems to have worked. What I understand is that it probably would have passed pretty easily if folks like yourselves hadn't gotten on the phone and educated your legislators about why this bill actually is not good for Ohio. Now, there are pieces of it that while I don't think they're necessary, I totally don't have a problem with. Pastors, rabbis, imams, any religious leader should be able to decide who they will and will not marry, and they've always had that right in the United States anyway, and they always will. It's protected at the U.S. Constitution and in the state constitution. Again, real briefly, some of the proponents, the people who wanted to pass this bill, they're called proponents if you want to pass a bill, were using the argument that they wanted to make sure that pastors were not sued if they turned somebody down and said they would not conduct their marriage. Now, when asked, they have all said, well, that hasn't happened. And so to some extent, it's a solution looking for a problem. And I will remind folks that right now, if somebody, say a same-sex couple, sue a pastor for refusing to marry them, they would all spend money on attorneys, and they would all go into court, and the pastor would win. It's the way the law is set up. But it doesn't prevent somebody from suing. Now, if the Pastor Protection Act passed, and a same-sex couple sued a pastor for refusing to marry them, they would all hire attorneys, pay money to these attorneys, and they would all go into court, and the pastor would win. It doesn't change anything. So why would proponents introduce this bill? Well, let's think about that for a minute, because there's more to it. There's more in that bill than just protecting a pastor. And you will notice, if you've been watching the news, that the proponents of this bill have recently started calling it not the Pastor Protection Act, but the Pastor and Church Protection Act. All right, this gets a little bit more difficult to understand. I would say all churches, or most anyway, churches, synagogues, mosques, hold their worship space as sacred, and it's used for worship, and that's it. Those spaces are not public accommodation. Now, while they are open technically, some people would say that their worship spaces are open to the public. That's not what we mean by public accommodation. Public accommodation is a place of commerce, a place of business that is open to the public. And that sanctuary, temple, space, whatever, is not a place of commerce. So what places of commerce that churches might own might be a hospital, could be a retirement center, could be a event hall that they have, and where they engage in business. They rent out the space, or they serve people who come into the hospital and charge them for those services, or they, provide service to people who need assisted living or nursing home help. All of that is commerce. And all of that should, if they are open to the public, they should be open to all of the public. including LGBT people. If they aren't, that's considered discrimination, and that's what, in Ohio, it is still legal in most places to refuse service to an LGBT person in a place of public accommodation, or to refuse to hire them, or refuse to promote them, or refuse to rent to them, or refuse them a mortgage. All of that is still legal in most of Ohio. There are some cities, there's, I've lost count, 19 of them that have full coverage, and by full coverage we mean gender identity, sexual orientation, and in public accommodation, housing, and employment. And so those kind of municipal ordinances do exist in those 19. I may have lost count. Anyway, they do exist in some cities: Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dayton, Athens, Toledo, Akron, Youngstown, a number of other smaller cities. But back to the public accommodation. Now, what gets sticky, right, is if a church space, all right, we'll use examples that were used by legislators. So if a tent is erected because there's been damage to the sanctuary, that tent has been erected and they're holding services in the tent, and then during the week they're using the tent to sell things. Maybe it's a bake sale, maybe it's a garage sale, maybe it's a Christmas craft sale, but that space is then open to the public. Now we start to get into a gray area of, is that public accommodation or not? Or, similarly, the sanctuary is under construction and the church is holding services in their fellowship hall, which during the rest of the week might be being used for some commercial purpose. And then those do get into gray areas. But remember, we're not talking about the pastor's right to say who he will and will not marry in any space. And we are not talking about the sanctuary, that sacred space that people worship in. Now, I would say the solution here is, if a church, mosque, synagogue does not want to run the risk of having to serve an LGBT person, don't run a commercial business out of your building, the one that has your sanctuary in it. And if you own other property because you need income for whatever purpose, then you need to be, like the retirement centers and the hospitals, etc. Then you need to be open to the public. So, as far as we know, at least for this General Assembly, which ends the end of this year, the Pastor Protection Act is off the table. There's a small chance something could happen next week, but to the best of our intel, it's not coming back this year. But I'm going to guess it comes back next year, when it has to start all over again. We have 2-year General Assemblies, and this is currently the 132nd General Assembly. It ends December 31st, and in January begins the 133rd General Assembly, which will go for 2 years and end then on December 31st of 2020. If a bill doesn't pass by December 31st of 2018, it has to start over again in 2019. Anyway, just a little update, everybody. Equals, if you want to help me get my message out to more people so that more people in YouTube land see this, then please subscribe. The more subscribers I have, the better viewing, more YouTube shows my video out there to the general public. Give me a thumbs up if you enjoy these. You can hit the little bell if you'd like to get notified every time I put up a new video. Bye, equals.